Vedam. Well, very good. Welcome, Dr. Vedam. It is a pleasure to have you on as always. And we're calling this, and if you have any opening, or I can give you the introduction and lay it out. Yeah.
You could go ahead. It's a pleasure to be here, Ankur, always, as always. So please go ahead.
Yes, pleasure to have you. So we're calling this an open house because Dr. Vedam has taught courses at HUA, he's done webinars, and this is an opportunity to really focus in on the course and invite our participants and attendees to get a feeling for the course, dig in, and of course, Dr. Vedam is going to start out with a presentation on this new framework on archaeology and astronomy, even though that was a major part of reconstructing Hindu history, and I've had the privilege of taking 2 courses, and there's so much information, but archaeology and astronomy is really such a strength that Dr. Vedam has, and so much information he's going to be sharing. And without reading the description again that you probably know, we're reconstructing Hindu history, right? The Europeans had their own project of constructing a world history when they were discovering, lands of people that they didn't know about, but obviously Hindu civilization and the rest of the world was thriving. And as we as Hindus embark upon this vitally important project of reclaiming our history in light of all these emerging evidence in these different fields, it's an amazing privilege to have somebody like Dr. Vedam with us, who is just got such a powerful understanding of history, his research, and he comes from his kind of engineering and his professional background, which was in power, electric, design automation. He did oil and gas work as well. But now he's working, and let me just give him a brief introduction and I can hand it over. Dr. Vedam is working at the confluence of applied mathematics, engineering, algorithms, computer science, archaeogenetics, archaeoastronomy, archaeology, and pursuing evidence of knowledge transfers from ancient India out of India. And so this is the big framework that we're going to get into, and Dr. Vedam has his inimical frameworks that have been attacking Hinduism, and he's probably going to outline what those are and how they have been deconstructing Hindu history, and that's a loaded word as well. And Dr. Vedam is not afraid to get into the controversial aspects of it, but from a fact-based, truth-telling perspective. What can we know? How do we know it? And let's go from there. And so with that, Dr. Vedam, maybe you can give a little bit of background on yourself if there's a context you want to give. You're in Texas as well, right? So we have people joining us from around the world, and let me just hand it to you, Dr. Vedam, to lead us through this webinar. And as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Ankur. So let me start with sharing my screen, and let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yep, we can see, and you'll just go into full screen mode with the presentation.
Just a minute. Yes, we should be there. And let me minimize the speaker view, and let me hide the meeting controls. So thank you, Ankur. Once again, it's a real pleasure to talk over here in this open house. So many of you might have seen my earlier talks where I have called out many of the issues with the narration of Indian history. And I will be revisiting some of those central points over here and viewing those important questions, the prism of archaeology and astronomy, and especially on the antiquity of ancient India. So that said, we first need to set the stage, right? So we need to see, why exactly do we even bother doing all this? What is wrong with our history? So if we look at historiography, or the process of writing history, we find there are 5 agencies aligned on Indian history. And like Ankur alluded, these are inimical agencies. These are the colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, leftist academia, and the Marxist forces. So we find that the Indians have been happy with their notion of history for the longest time. Sthala Puranas, the Itihasas, and oral records and folk songs. This has been our notion of history for a long time. When the colonial people came to India, they wanted to figure out what exactly is this history of India and how does it relate to the Western civilization, the Greek civilization, and so on. So they went through a process of studying it, and they brought in a certain ideology in order to control India, as well as bringing in a biblical framework. So they started doing some distortions in Indian history. And after William Jones saw how Sanskrit is related to Latin and Greek, there's been a lot of interest in the European circles to try and find out why is this relationship over there and how are the Indian people related to the Western people. So therein from 1800 was born linguistic analysis and the whole new way of looking at this, Eurocentric ideas, where the Western supremacy was tried to be placed out there and Indians were seen as part of something called an Aryan invasion theory, which we'll talk about later. In this toxic mix was the Western interest, the missionaries who came along with the colonial people and wanted to convert Indians. So they were at the forefront of translating many, many works. And so the Sanskrit works are translated by several missionaries with an idea to try and show that these works are not very good, reliable, or all those kind of things, to try and have a feeling that Indian works are not up to the standard and Western works are much, much better. Then since 1947, we have unfortunately had leftist academia bias in our educational framework, and they bring in alien lenses to look at all of Indian social dynamics. Everything is looked at with a prism of oppressor, oppressed, and these kind of narratives, and you cannot recognize in their narrative the history of the Indian civilization. And since 1971, the Marxists who are closely aligned, the leftists, have also taken over. And so we find these 5 agencies control the history of India. Why should that matter to us? Well, we see that this narrative has given rise to something called an Aryan invasion theory in 1500 BCE. The narrative says that nomads from Central Asia, they invaded India in 1500 BCE, and in the process, they destroyed a superior civilization, the Harappa civilization that existed there. And they say that India was overrun with all these illiterate nomads who didn't even have a script. They just had oral traditions. They brought Sanskrit, caste system, cow worship, and all these kind of negative things. And India, according to them, had to wait for 1,000 years, another 1,000 years, before civilization arose in the East, in Magadha, after contact with the Greeks, with the implication that Greeks are the ones who civilized India. Once again, writing came with Ashokan times and so on, and that was the thinking. So the bottom line is they say, look, you haven't had enough time for knowledge generation, whether it is in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, whatever it is. You are, after all, an illiterate people who recently became civilized after contact with the Greeks. How could you have all this advanced knowledge? Therefore, if you have any knowledge, it must have come from the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Chinese, and all these other civilizations. They must have taught you. So we see over here this caricatured view that Aryans got Sanskrit into India in 1500 BCE. They say Brahmi, from which is derived all Indian scripts, is derived from Aramaic, which is a Semitic script which came to India from Levant. They say Babylon gave us astronomy, and they say math and sciences came from Greece. Turkic Muslims, they got culture, cuisine, architecture, music, civilization to India. And they also say that the British got us science, technology, and rational thought. And finally, today they also say that Bhakti came to India through St. Thomas. It wasn't there prior to that. So these are some of the narratives which are horrendously distorted. So we are seeing that these narratives greatly distort the history of the Indian civilization, the dates, anchor points, every aspect of our knowledge system and identity is impacted by this narrative. So throughout this course, we try to see under what lens can we study these assertions and look at whether these are valid or not. And we find that there's absolutely no basis for any of these things. Coming to the field of astronomy itself, just a sampling, there are several colonial scholars and translators of Indian astronomy. In the early times, 1691 through about 1700s, these translations were more or less, they praised Indian astronomy that is much superior to the West and ancient and so on. But after William Jones did his Aryan invasion theory postulations, from then on was born a bigoted way of looking at the Indian civilization, that everything in astronomy has been borrowed from the Greeks. So all these names in red show people who have worked on Indian astronomy with the view that it came from outside of India. So we find that several controversies are there, and these controversies are driven by the fact that Indian astronomy shows far greater antiquity than suggested by Aryan invasion theory, linguistic theories, and so on. How do you resolve that? So the controversies after linguistic theories came were, how old is Indian astronomy? Where did Indian astronomy originate? And they predispose a question saying Indians learned from the Greeks, and what did they learn from the Greeks? And they learned from Babylonians. What did they learn from Babylonians? So these are the kind of controversies that arose in that time frame, and these are all distorted ways of looking at things. So early, there were several attempts to discredit Indian works because that is the path they took. Instead of trying to say that, okay, Indian astronomy is very, very ancient, so how is that possible? Instead of saying perhaps there's a problem with linguistic analysis, they upheld the linguistic analysis and the biblical chronology on the basis of which these things were done, and said, rather, the problem is with Indian astronomy. The problem is Indians did not know how to make measurements of the skies. They did not know how to do these mathematics. They made mistakes in copying the things from Babylonians and Greeks. So theirs is an inferior science. So the one example of that is John Bentley, who alleged that all of Hindu chronology is fabricated. He was a missionary, and he couldn't take the fact that many of the Purana, even before Indian chronology went even before that, and they couldn't find his relationship to Noah or his descendants. And we also find that Max Muller, when he was confronted to the antiquity of Indian astronomy, he too came with an entire book where he said that I don't accept any of Indian astronomy. They're all unreliable. So he's not going to take any of the texts for doing any dating, except the Vedanga Jyotisha, which Colebrooke dated to 1400 BC, because that is after the Aryan invasion theory. So we find these views are used even today by some Indian scholars and others who don't even know the basics of Indian astronomy. We're going to examine all of these things. One example of recent people who talk about these things, Otto Neubauer, American Indology. So he concludes Indians copied astronomy from Greeks and Babylonians based on several assertions in his book, Exact Sciences and Antiquity. But then Subhash Kak has rebutted this very thoroughly, and we'll examine some of these things in this course. Pingree was a student of Neubauer. So he too followed the teachings of his, whatever his teacher had told him. Additionally, he made several other statements, which we find that Subhash Kak gave a concise rebuttal to several of these claims. Shukla, he said that Pingree had even mistranslated a Nepali copy of Yavaneshwara's Yavana Jataka. He corrected those translations and said, this is the correct way in which you should do in this paper in 1989. And Bill Mark, another researcher, he says Pingree fabricated findings, misread, conjecture to arrive at conclusions. So a very, very strong statement. So many people have rejected these works as incorrect because they're all made with a view to uphold the Eurocentric scholarship on the basis of linguistic analysis. So all the readings are on that basis, and they lead to various problems down the road. And that is what we see in these authors who have countered some of these things. So that said, let us look at two lines of evidence. One of them is archaeology, the other one is astronomy, and see what are these two areas telling us. But periodization in archaeology differs by the region. It is traditional among archaeologists today to see things like Paleolithic, the upper, middle, and lower, Mesolithic after the Ice Age, and Neolithic after agriculture, the Chalcolithic with copper, then with bronze 5,000 years ago, then iron 4,000 years ago. But these are not hard and fast. Different parts of the world, these are different. So that's very important to remember that. So we find this paper, for example, which says that in Tamil Nadu, by optical luminescence, these researchers, Shanti Papu and others, in 2011 published a paper in Science saying that these tools are 1 million years old tools have been found in Tamil Nadu. For example, this is one such hand axe, which is 1 million years ago. This is in a museum in Haryana today. And this is an evidence of one of those things. So one might even think, who are these people who lived in India 1 million years ago? Well, the paleontologists tell us that earlier human species called Homo erectus, they were the ones who probably lived in this time frame. And this is the range they had: Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, and other places. And these people were the ones who probably lived about 1 million years ago. And they also say that the Homo erectus died out about 600,000 years ago. This entire species became extinct because we don't see any more fossilized remains in paleontology. So then this very interesting paper came from Athirampakam, Tamil Nadu, that they found stone tools, that 350,000-year-old stone tools, showing evidence of superior cranial capacity. These are specialized tools for piercing, for scraping, for cutting, and things of this nature, which shows a lot of planning and abstract thinking, which is normally associated with the superior cranial capacity of Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens are not supposed to come to India before 90,000 years ago. So the question came, who made these tools 350,000 years ago? Well, one more example is the Narmada man. And this was a skull discovered in Narmada Valley in 1982, Arun Sonakia of GSI. And people who worked on this, Kenneth Kennedy, for example, he said that this has got a cranial capacity very close to the modern Homo sapien, 1421 cubic centimeters. And he said this is probably an early Homo sapien sample. So some intriguing results are out there that is calling into question some of the genetic results that assert that modern humans came to India only about 70,000 years ago, 90 to 70,000 years ago. So these things contest that thinking. Today, there are people who have postulated one more species of humans, which have been termed as Denisovans. So Denisovans are supposed to have lived in this time frame, 195,000 to 122,000 years ago. And the range of them are supposed to be, for example, Siberia, this area, also in India and other places. And they suspect that it is Denisovans who made these samples. And there's a link from archaic Denisovans to modern Homo sapiens. There are several scientists who are working on these ideas, but this gives you an idea. Along with Neanderthals, there were also this species of Denisovans, and this is the range which they occupied. So put that aside. Once Homo sapiens were in India, we also know that a lot of archaeological remains have been found throughout India in various time frames in the Bias Valley, Soan Valley, and other such places in northern India, southern India. And this tells us that India was occupied for a pretty long time by people who were making tools and leaving these samples of these tools over here, which we have found archaeologically today, and we can see the extent of their knowledge. We also find in this paper in Science, which came out in 2020, that in Sri Lanka, in a particular cave, they found remains of bows and arrows 48,000 years ago. And they said it's the first or the earliest bow and arrow technology found outside of Africa 48,000 years ago. These are some of the spear points and arrowheads and other things they discovered in this particular cave. That is showing how these early humans are also using different technologies. Then in Jwalapuram, we find 35,000 years ago rock shelter with some of the samples of the kind of tools that were used. Then all over India, Bhimbetka, Madhya Pradesh, 35,000 years ago, we find rock art that even shows horses with riders. We find in Edakal caves in Kerala, even something called a proto-writing appears to be there. Then Birana, Rakigari, and other such places we are finding in Haryana 10,000 years ago. Ketavaram, Andhra Pradesh, 8,000 years ago. Ramchandrapuram in Telangana about 12,000 years ago. We find samples all over India. There are ancient artifacts. Then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Pompuh, because this is pretty recent in the news. Where is Pompuh? It is in this part of Tamil Nadu, where the Kaveri River comes. So it's pretty close to the delta of the Kaveri over here. And to give you your bearings, this is Taragambadi over here, where the Dutch were, and Pondicherry is to the north of this area. So this is an early port of the Cholas around 300 BCE. and was frequented by a lot of foreigners who came over here, place of trade, mentioned in Periplus of Erythraean Sea, in several Tamil literary works, and so on. There's a paper that came out from Professor Ramaswamy in Current Science in August 2020, where they used submerged vehicles and they were able to study the seabed about 25 kilometers outside of Pompuh, and he found evidence of ancient harbor and man-made structures. This 1 to 4 are man-made structures that we see over here, and this is approximately about 15 to 25 kilometers outside this coastline, present-day coastline, at a depth of about 125 meters. And what is even more interesting is he's saying that if you consider the shoreline, this shoreline was 20,000 years before present, 125 meters depth, 15,000 years before present at this particular depth. So by the time you're coming here, we are seeing pretty ancient samples that are quite old, between 15,000 years to 18,000 years. You're finding human artifacts at this bottom layer. So this happened because of the last ice ages, the late glacial maximum, about 18,000 to 20,000 years ago, when most of the water was locked up in ice and the sea levels were lower. And at that time, Indian coastline extended up to here, and there were human settlements here. Then as the ice melted, the water levels rose, and we are seeing that the present shoreline is over here. So 125 meters below the sea level, we are finding human artifacts. That is the bottom line, 18,000 years ago. And here are some examples of some artifacts found from there, from some ruins, some circles, broken jet, later time period occupation also by these people. And he's also showing that this Pompuh was resettled 7 times at different times because of the sea effect. It had moved to different parts, which is what Professor Ramaswamy is saying. Very, very interesting results over here. Jumping from southern India to northern India, we go to the Saraswati Sindhu Basin, and we examine the results from Deccan College, this paper by K.N. Dikshit, recent paper over here. And this one shows the extent of the Saraswati Sindhu civilization. As you can see, a lot of settlements and sites in this area. And examining only the results. For example, carbon dating from various sites. They've taken many, many samples in different trenches over here in Mehrgarh, which is in present-day Pakistan, and radiometric dates. And some of the earliest dates they found is 9,300 years before present. Approximately, after calibration, it is 7,435 BCE. Very, very ancient period of time. We are finding artifacts in Mehrgarh. Kalibangan is one more site. If you look at the radiocarbon dating over there, it is coming to 6,700 years before present, or approximately 5,600 BCE. We are finding dates that ancient over here. If you go to Haryana, Rakhigarhi, over here we are seeing in this particular place, we are seeing the calibrated date at around 6,180 years before present. That's how ancient some of the samples over here are. Then if you go to Birana, in Birana, we are seeing that in calendar years before present, 8,350 years before present, or calibrated approximately 7,570 BCE. So very, very clearly, we are seeing archaeological artifacts, underwater artifacts in Tamil Nadu, as well as overland artifacts, Saraswati Sindhu, with carbon dating. We are uncovering in various sites, showing great antiquity in the archaeological samples also. We will examine some of these things in detail in my class. And going on to the artifacts uncovered from Birana, according to Rao and Mani, they are showing how calendar years before present, Machir Harappa, 2,750 years before present, 4,950 years, 6,450, all the way to 9,450 years before present. Various artifacts have been found in various layers. Very, very interesting. Moving on, Saraswati Sindhu. Go to central India. Today we have found rock art all over the Deccan and various places, and which you cannot see from the ground, but you had to take a drone with a video camera, go up and see it. And these are some of the imagery from there, have been dated to greater than 10,000 years before present to keep it in line with Bhimbetka and other places. Dwarka is one more place where this paper came out March 2003 from National Institute of Ocean Technology in Chennai. So they took a ship equipped with sonar to Gulf of Cambay, and they did their sonar dating over here, sonar mapping over there. And they also dredged up a piece of wood from here, which they sent for carbon dating to two places in Hyderabad and Germany. They came back with a date from 8,592 to 9,331 years before present. They also discovered what looks like a major structure, 9-kilometer long feature, 40 meters below the sea level. So very clearly, we are seeing a submerged area over here, which could be of this antiquity that we're looking at, about 9,000 years before present. Harappa, we are all familiar, 3,500 BC. In relation to the timelines that I've said, these look like they're very, very recent. But according to our textbooks, these are the oldest civilizations they talk about. Anyway, this is the Harappa. And very recently in Sanauli, we have uncovered chariots which are horse-bound chariots, and graves of these chariots and such things. So this is dated anywhere from 1800 to 2000 BCE in Sanauli in UP. And Erekal caves in Kerala, if you go 8,000 to 5,000 years before present, we are seeing some sample writings over here. And some of the people studying this have said a sign over there is common with the sign seen in Harappa, indicating that perhaps there is connection between Harappa and the Erekal people through trade and other such things. If you go to southern India, once again, Adichanallur. In Adichanallur, we are seeing pretty ancient artifacts there, 2,500 BCE, and this bronze of what they call Mother Goddess, I like to call it Shakti. We are seeing that. We are seeing various other artifacts over here. And Kiradi is in the news today because it shows an urban settlement in the Waikai river banks in Madurai area. And this also shows carbon dated around 6th century BCE. Very, very interesting because of some of the common connections it has with the people at Indus. Very, very interesting results. Arikamedu is near Pondicherry. It is mentioned in the Roman Periplus of Erythraean Sea, and this has been dated by Vimla Begley to around 200 BCE. It is a center which made glass beads, dyed muslin, and was trading with the Roman Empire and other such places. Very interesting to see this. Then when the tsunami came to southern India, it also uncovered a temple, and this temple is approximately 2,200 years old, showing a common culture from northern India to southern India in a very, very ancient period of time. So if you examine a map of India and then place on it the names mentioned, the Itihasas, our epics, and various other works, we are finding that all over India is mentioned in our text, showing that epics are deeply tied to the geography of the land. But we don't use the epics as sources of history because we are supposedly a secular people. So we ignore all of the epics and the geographical knowledge and the knowledge of seasons, the habits of people. Everything is discarded. We don't study anything. And we teach our children instead just this, that in India, there was this Harappa civilization, started 5,000 years ago, declined about 3.6 thousand years ago, and that is it. There's nothing else. So children come away with a very distorted idea of what India has been. So the conclusions from the archaeology is that we are seeing human habitation continuously for more than 1 million years ago, Homo sapien artifacts from 70,000 years ago or so, Pompuh Dwarka showing underwater artifacts 18,000 to 9,000 years ago, southern Indian artifacts from 5,000 to 2,500 years ago. However, textbooks show a shallow understanding of antiquity of human presence in India in order to propagate Aryan invasion theory and the bigoted notion that Indians today, their identity is they are Aryan people, Dravidian people, and tribals. So any of these earlier artifacts is pushed as tribal artifacts, and the rest are classified as Aryans and Dravidians, which is completely untenable based on some of the narrations that we're going to see, as well as some of the evidence I've just shown you this far. So going to the second part, we're going to talk a little bit about Indian astronomy, the material evidence, stories, siddhantas, and so on. So in the archaeological evidence, we are finding on rock art in Kashmir, we are seeing some celestial symbolism in the rock art. In Karnataka, in a grave, we are seeing once again the sun, moon, and star formations. Once more in Kashmir, we are seeing the cardinal points of astronomy and some rock art over here. One more rock art over here that is showing perhaps supernova and some Harappa seals. This Harappa seal, for example, from 3000 BCE, perhaps is showing the equinox positions according to Professor Abhayankar. And one more seal from Harappa is showing 7 standing figures, which is shown as a symbolism for planetary alignment that happened in around 3104 BCE. In India, we have had, in addition to material artifacts, an oral tradition, a very, very strong oral tradition. For example, in the Bhagavata Purana, Brahma Vaivarta Purana, Vishnu Purana, and many others, we have several stories. For example, Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. Then Chandra was cursed to a life of waxing and waning. Then we have a story of Dhruva, who was a child who was made a star, immobile star in the sky. Then we are told about Vrika, the Ashura, which is a symbolism for the Uttarayana and Dakshinayana phenomenon. So I just give a sampling over here, but we have many, many stories in India which are encoding wisdom in the metaphor of stories. So if you have the key to unlock the wisdom in that story, you know what wisdom was intended to communicate. If you don't have the key to unlock the wisdom, it becomes silly mythology to you. So unfortunately today, the vast majority of India, 99% perhaps, has got no clue of what the symbolism over here is. And so for most people, it is either it's a religious thing or it is a mythology. So this is where it is placed. But the reality is each one of them has got a very deep idea behind it, an astronomical encoding of astronomical information. Idea is that because the moon takes 27 days to come back to the same backdrop of stars, it rises at a different time every day in the eastern horizon, takes 27 days to come back to the same backdrop of stars. These are the 27 nakshatras that ancient Indians devised, saying that moon will be in one nakshatra every day, visiting his 27 wives. That was the story they encode over there. The Cyanotic month is related to the fact that the moon takes approximately 15 days from new moon to full moon, another 15 days from full moon back to new moon. So a full cycle of full moon, new moon, full moon, or full moon, new moon, full moon takes approximately 30 days. These are the tithis. And this was referred to as the story of moon being condemned to a life of waxing and waning. That was an affirmation of the Cyanotic month. The solar year was known because of the Uttarayana Dakshinayana phenomenon. Sun appears to go north and north and north, reaches northernmost point, then comes south to southernmost point. So one full cycle takes 365.24 days, and Indians knew about this. So the killer application in India has been, how do we mark time using the celestial calendar in the skies? So this is the main reason why Indians made many calendars, coordinate systems, measurement systems, mathematics. Everything came about with the desire to accurately measure the passage of time. So we have used for a long time the Panchanga to mark time. And the Panchanga contains a basic unit as a Muhurta. A Muhurta is 1/30th of a day or 48-minute interval. And it measures time in a 5-dimensional sense. The nakshatra of the day, which is part of the sidereal month, the tithi of the day, which is part of the Cyanotic month, the vara or the weekday, the yoga, which is the angle between the sun and the moon, and the karana, which is tithi by 2. So using these 5 dimensions, ancient Indians marked the passage of time. The year was always seen to begin in the vernal equinox, and we'll see that a little later. So there's several time constants, things like one muhurta is 48 minutes. We know that from today. 30 muhurtas is one ahoratram, which is a sidereal day or 24 hours. 30 ahoratrams is one masa. 30 tithis is approximately a Cyanotic month. 2 masas is one ritu or season of 60 days. 3 ritus is one ayanam or 180 degrees, the Uttarayana, Dakshinayana. So 2 ayanams make one varsha or a lunar day of 360 days. And you'll say, wait a minute, the year is not 360, it's 365.24 days. Well, the Rigveda is calling out the lunar year of 360 days. And the shortfall was always celebrated in ancient India with the yajna, And the yajna was the Atiratra sacrifice, which took 4.5 to 6 days to complete, in which you stop the counting of time during that time frame. And Abhyankar is calling this out. By the time we come to Atharva Veda, we are seeing the statement that Rohita created Adhika Masa. Adhika Masa was an intercalary month inserted into the lunar calendar, so that every 2 to 3 years, so that over a period of 5 years, the average size of the year becomes 365.24 days. This is how ancient Indians ensured synchronism of the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. And we are seeing from Abhyankar's work that Indians marked the Vedic year at various periods of time. When the nakshatra was in the vernal equinox, in Magha in 7000 BCE, in Pausa in 6000 BCE, and Mragashira 3800 BCE, and so on. So at various points, we are seeing the Indian calendrical system changing. And I'll tell you later that this is because of a phenomenon called Precession of Equinox, because the year is mentioned where the nakshatra is in the vernal equinox point. When precession effects take over, these things change over a period of 1000 to 2000 years. It visibly changes. So the reference point kept changing. That is why we are seeing the calendrical systems also kept changing in India. So ancient Indians understood the cardinal points of astronomy, the winter solstice, summer solstice, vernal equinox, autumn equinox. They also had reference planes, a horizon, the ecliptic across which the sun, the moon, and the heavenly bodies seem to go, and the celestial equator on which the sun will be exactly on the day of the equinox. They knew that also. They also knew the celestial poles, the north celestial pole across which the earth is rotating. That is a point where Dhruva, the story of Dhruva, for example, the axis of rotation. They also knew the local directions, north, south, east, west, as well as zenith, which is directly overhead. So these things were used by ancient Indians in order to measure various things in the sky. So they had coordinate systems through which they measured various things in the sky. We are seeing 5,000 years of instruments. For example, Harappa, 3000 BC, we are seeing the water clock. Vedanga Jyotisha also talks that. Here's one example of a water clock from archaeological remains at Harappa. Aryabhattiya talks about all these instruments. Varamira is talking about graphic calculation instruments. Brahmagupta is talking about some of these instruments as shown here. Bhaskara is talking about circular platform. This circular platform is also seen in Lothal. If you go to Lothal in Gujarat, outside Ahmedabad, even today you can find the examples of the circular brick platforms that are used for astronomical measurements. Then Lalla is talking about the armillary sphere and other things. Mahendra Suri, who lived at the time of the Islamic period, where he also used astrolabes, and Jai Singh, we know, who constructed Jantar Mantar, used also European instruments. So we are seeing in India that we had measurements, and these measurements led to modeling and prediction and so on for astronomy. For example, in our ancient book called Vedanga Jyotisha, which is dated to 1400 BCE, we are seeing something called the rule of three. Rigvedanga Jyotisha and Yajurvedanga Jyotisha. They're saying a certain rule should be applied again and again by applying this formula that is shown over here. We can recognize that in modern terms as this one, A by B equal to C by X. To get X, we'll do cross multiplication and we get BC by A. I have posed this as this following question that ancient Indians would have seen. If they can measure a planet moving delta S, mind you, they had all these instruments to measure the skies, and they measure how much a planet moves in a unit of time, delta T. They had water clocks and things like that. Then in a time T, how many units does it move? It moves by this quantity ST equal to delta S by delta T times T. Observe that this is very close to something called dy by dx, which is used in calculus. So even by 1400 BCE, ancient Indians were using iterative prediction of motion using linear models. That is what we are seeing from this particular work. We are also seeing a great development in mathematics because this linear prediction is not enough to estimate how the planets will move. You cannot use a straight line in a place where the sphere, because the celestial sphere is there, you need to use some nonlinear models. So we are seeing that by the time we come to Surya Siddhanta, we have trigonometric models, and the trigonometric models are the ones that were used to measure many things in the sky. And by the time you see Aryabhatta, Bhaskara I, Brahmagupta, they have deeper and deeper results in functional approximation, how to get some of the nonlinear effects in the sky, so the predictions would be better and better. By the time we come to Madhava of Sangamagrama in Kerala in the 13th and 14th century, we are seeing that he's got series expansion for sin x, cos x, tan inverse x, and so on. So it is telling us that ancient Indians had evidence of observation, of modeling, and refinement. All these things are there in ancient India, contrary to Western assertions that say ancient Indians did not know how to measure, they did not know how to do mathematics, coordinate systems, all nonsense. Looking at the evidence, we can say that that is an incorrect statement. Indians definitely knew all of these things. And the models itself, for example, Aryabhatta modeled the solar system with an epicycle model. He took a frame of reference where the Earth is the central frame of reference, stationary, and the moon goes around the Earth, and the planets and the sun go around the Earth. But as Mercury, for example, is going around the Earth, it's also doing another cycle called an epicycle. And we are seeing that there's Indian models developed into something called the pulsating epicycle, where the epicycle contracts and expands. Aryabhatta had two epicycles. He had a Shigra, which is a quick epicycle, and a Manda, which is a slow epicycle. And to model Mercury, he didn't take the center as the observer, but an offset quant to account for the eclipse. That is the movement of Earth is not circular around the orbit, to account for these things. Very, very, very interesting intellectual developments by ancient Indians. We are seeing evidence of spherical geometry, trigonometry, measurement devices, prediction, tracking, mathematical equation modeling, error correction, approximations, parameter fitting. Everything is there. If you see the dynamic tradition of innovation in India, Surya Siddhanta, Lalla, Lagada, Aryabhatta, come to Nilakanta Somayaji in 1400. We are also seeing the solar system model has changed from Aryabhatta's model. So Nilakanta Somayaji said, all right, if you consider the Earth as a reference frame where the moon is going around the Earth, let the sun also go around the Earth. But then Mercury goes around the sun, Venus goes around the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn also go around the sun, and sun and all these planets will therefore go around the Earth. So this is the partial heliocentric model that we are seeing, Nilakanta Somayaji, something that was used by Tycho Brahe 150 years later in Europe. We are seeing the same kind of thing. And this paper by Anil Narayanan, for example, he's trying to see what is the error in the vernal equinox prediction if you use the Indian epicycle model and the Ptolemy's Greek epicycle model. And he's saying the error, which is shown on this axis, is so much greater for the Greek model, and the error is so much lesser for the Indian model. Then there's a Britisher called Brennand who wrote a book on Hindu astronomy in 1896, colonial person, and he too studied the Indian epicycle and the Greek epicycle, and he remarked that the epoch of Surya Siddhanta solar epicycle parameters has to be 3500 BC because the error was smallest in that time frame. Anil Narayanan did a more detailed study, and he found the smallest error was in 5000 BCE. So it opens a question, how old exactly is the Indian epicycle model in connection with the Greek model? Very interesting questions there. Then we have a long tradition of astronomical works. For example, we know about Aryabhatta, so many works that he's done in mathematics, in astronomy, and so on. We know about Varahamihira, who wrote commentaries on the Siddhanta texts, the Paitamaha, Vashishta, Romaka, Pulisa, as well as Surya Siddhanta. So he's very famous because of these. We don't have these Siddhantas anymore, but we have his commentaries, so we know some of the contents in those texts. Then Brahmagupta, who lived in Ujjain, and he had got a lot of mathematical work, some of which were transmitted by the Arabs. That's how the Arabs got to learn Indian astronomy and mathematics, through Brahmagupta's works. And that was transmitted to Europe. That's how Europe also learned Indian mathematics and astronomy, all of Brahmagupta's works, basically, including rules for zero operation, positive numbers, negative numbers, and so on. Bhaskara 1, Bhaskara 2, enormous numbers of works in mathematics, astronomy, and so on. Madhava Sangamagrama, we talked about him earlier. All these series functions that you see here were products of his genius and his school. So in his school, we find infinite series, calculus, trigonometry, algebra, and a solution of nonlinear equations, including pre-calculus and so on. Alumni, people like Parameshwara, Nilakanta Somayaji, Jeshta Deva, and many others who came from this particular school. So some more long tradition of astronomical observations have been in India, and we just examine some of them. Ancient Indians obviously studied the solar and the lunar eclipse. In Rigveda itself, we are seeing Rishi Atri, who knew why the solar eclipse is happening. That is mentioned over here in Rigveda, as well as in the Brahmanas, which there is one person who's dated this to 4677 BCE, but this is based on some assumptions, but this is what we're seeing. By the time we come to Aryabhattiya, Aryabhatta had even formulas to estimate the length of Earth's shadow, Moon's shadow during the eclipse. He had got, as you can see here, actual formulas to do these things. The length of Earth's shadow, length of Moon's shadow, whether it will fall on the Earth, what is the duration of obscuration, the shadow time, and so on. So he also explained what Rahu and Ketu are in terms of the nodes, these two, the rising node and the falling node, by considering the plane of Moon's orbit and the ecliptic and saying when will the solar eclipse occur, when will the lunar eclipse occur, and what is the meaning of Rahu and Ketu in this context. So brilliant works we're seeing in ancient India on these things. Indians had also measured precession. Like I said, precession is a 25,700 year slow wobble of the Earth, and because of which the point of vernal equinox will keep changing over time. Indians had observed that the calendar is changing and they wanted to have a grasp on that. And we see in the works of Riddhi Garga, 500 BCE, he estimated precession to be 36 arc seconds a year, a figure that was repeated by the Greek Hipparchus in 120 BCE. Suri Siddhanta estimated it to 54 arc seconds a year. Bhaskara II, he had estimated at 50.9 arc seconds a year. And we are seeing the modern estimate is 50.4 arc seconds a year. And we see that this is also there in Suri Siddhanta in one of the works. So very, very interesting that ancient Indians had even measured these things. They also measured transits. Transits were when the Mercury or Venus go across the face of the sun. And Mallikarjuna Suri, Kamalakara, we noticed that they had seen these transits and described that. We also see ancient Indians were learning about planetary conjunctions. Conjunction is when one planet comes close to the other, perhaps even touching that. For example, last year, during the same time, December, we had Saturn approaching Jupiter very, very close in the sky. This is one of my photos of that, very, very close in the sky. We see that conjunctions were studied in Suri Siddhanta, for example. Conjunction when planets conjunct, they call it a yuddha, a fight. Planets come close to each other, or when planets conjunct the stars in the sky. That was also mentioned in the Surya Siddhanta, including how to estimate that and such things. Indians had also seen the lunar occultation. For example, the love story of Chandra and Rohini can be cast in the metaphor of a lunar occultation, and I have discussed this in one of my talks. Indians also observed comets. They were called Dhomaketu in India. So we find many, many references to comets in ancient India, in Rigveda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Parishara Tantra, Vriddhi Garga, Varahamira, Sangamira, Tamil works, and so on. So these very ancient comets, is difficult for us to date them. Normally comets we can date because of huge periodicity that some of these comets have. But it is not easy to date them because we don't know when Mahabharata, Ramayana could have occurred. So we cannot precisely say when this comet would be observed over here. So, but from the 12th century onwards, whatever observation has been made of comets in India, they can reliably be dated, but the earlier ones are difficult to date. So my last part, Antiquity of Indian Astronomy, I have alluded to this. Vedanga Jyotisha, we can date this to 1440 BCE because this ancient text is saying about winter solstice at Ganeshta Nakshatra. So Ganeshta Nakshatra, because of precession effects, we no longer have winter solstice. Ganeshta Nakshatra, for example, December 22nd, just about 4 days ago, was a winter solstice point. But then it is not happening when sun is in Ganeshta. It's happening at a different nakshatra. So we can date back in our planetarium software and figure out that it was last at Ganeshta in 1440 BCE. That's how we know the date of Vedanga Jyotisha. Shatapatha Brahmana by Rishni Yajnavalkya has got a statement, Krittika never swerves from the east, and this can be dated to 2982 BCE to show when the Krittika Nakshatra had a heliacal rising. It'll rise before the sun, exactly on the celestial equator. This blue line here is the celestial equator. The sun would rise soon after over the horizon and the celestial equator. This happened last in 2982 BC, and maybe plus and minus maybe 80 years on either side. We find an ancient epoch is encoded in many Indian tables. Puranas talk about Kali Yuga. Aryabhattiya, Surya Siddhanta refer to this. Pulisa Siddhanta, Brahmagupta, Al-Baruni, they refer to this. Aihole temple epigraphy, it mentions about this. Then in Siam tables, Cassini studied this and declared this epoch as this midnight of February 1718, 3102 BCE. And after that, all these people studied this. These are all colonialists, Playfair, Bentley, Colebrook, Burgess, and they all determined that Surya Siddhanta is referring to the same event, February 1718, 3102 BCE. It's a conjunction of planets, sun, moon, and all the planets, the Revati Nakshatra. And this has been traditionally marked as the beginning of Kali Yuga in every Indian calendar and tradition. Even today, devout Hindus, when they say their prayers, they refer to this event in Kali Yuga. And we can again see that if we see the planetarium software, we find that Guru, Shukran, Revati Nakshatra, Mangala, Buddhan, Surya, Shani, they're all clustered in this. And this date is 3102 BCE, February 18th. We have a story of Aditi in the Rigveda and other texts. For example, in the Aitreya Brahmana. Aitreya Brahmana, there's a statement that the Yajna observe a festival because the vernal equinox point had changed. They did not know where it had gone to. They went to Aditi and said, let us know the sacrifice through thee. Aditi said, let it be so, but I'll ask a boon from you. They said, choose. She said, all sacrifice or yajnas will begin and end with me, meaning the year will begin with her and end with her. Aditi is today identified as the castor and pollux of the Greek tradition. Aditi and Diti, these are the stars. So because of the effect of precession that I talked about, 25,700 year wobble of the earth, the vernal equinox position had changed. So at some point, ancient Indians could not do their annual festivals or anything because the year's marker had changed. So it's remembering an occasion when the vernal equinox was reset to the position of Aditi. And this resetting has been identified by Balagangadhar Tilak as well as Professor Abhayankar as vernal equinox at Punarvashu Nakshatra. Punarvashu is where Diti and Aditi, castor and pollux are. And vernal equinox here can be dated to approximately 6000 BCE. Very, very ancient period of time. Then there are many stories of the Ashwinis in several Rigveda, Markandeya Purana, and other such works. I'll not go into the story itself, but the key issue is that it refers to the winter solstice happening at the Ashwini Nakshatra. This is again identified by Abhayankar and Balagangadhar Tilak, and this phenomenon can be dated precisely to 7200 BCE. One more phenomenon, Surya Siddhanta is referring to the nakshatra called Swati. Swati is a star in Greek, we call it Arcturus. This is the Arcturus star where the Big Dipper points to that in the Boots constellation. So Swati is the star that has got one of the fastest movement in the sky. We call it proper motion. Proper motion means star has typically got a three-dimensional velocity, radial velocity, space velocity, transverse velocity. But from our perspective, it only appears that its angle is changing in the sky. We cannot perceive any other motion. We call this angular motion as proper motion. Swati has got 2 arcsecond movement in a year, one of the fastest stars in the sky. So the modern position of Swati is off by 1 degree compared to the Greek records. So we can date it to approximately 1,800 years old as a Greek records. But in Surya Siddhanta, it is off by 6 degrees. So if you take 6 degrees multiplied to minutes, multiplied to seconds, and divided by 2, we get 10,800 years ago, this observation in Surya Siddhanta is relevant, approximately 8,000 BCE. These are the kind of things that the British encountered, and they said that Indians did not know how to measure the skies. But we are seeing a strong tradition of measurement in the Indian tradition, as I've shown. So such an assertion is not correct. So that said, my grand conclusion over here, we are seeing that astronomical knowledge is encoded as stories in ancient India. We see Siddhanta, which is mathematical astronomy, strong development of mathematics as old as approximately 1400 BC, if not earlier. Long trajectory of knowledge from earliest work to the Odisha scientist Patani Samanta Chandrasekhar. Observe planets, comets, transits, conjunctions, eclipse, precession, all these astronomical phenomena were studied by ancient Indians. Mathematical models were developed, measurement devices, approximations, predictions, refinements, partial heliocentric model. These are all the heights of accomplishment. And soon after this was when Indian knowledge was destroyed by Islamic invasions, as well as colonial ethnocide and destruction of the Indian education system. Soon after that, colonials had overtaken many Asian civilizations, and they monopolized the development of science and technology from approximately 1600, the year 1600, through recent times, maybe up to 1900 and even later. The Europeans monopolized science and technology, but now we are seeing that people from all parts of the world, including India, they are again contributing to this after a brief lapse of around 300 years. So the antiquity that we're seeing in astronomy, which in earlier eras were discarded because there was no archaeological support for this astronomy, today we are seeing that support from the material evidence in astronomy as archaeology. We are seeing in Birana 7,200 years old, 9,000 years old, and these kind of artifacts that is well within some of the dates which are given to you. So these are clear evidence that these are not just cooked up dates. These are there in our old traditions. These are there in our texts, and these can be dated precisely. And we have got archaeological support now showing that this is an ancient civilization and so on. So we have strong evidence to uphold the antiquity of the Indian civilization and a strong reason to discard the discredited Aryan invasion that constrains Indian chronology. We will learn many of these things in detail in the courses that I intend offering at Hindu University of America. This will be a two-term course, the first on reconstructing Hindu history and the second on omissions and commissions. So with this, I will stop sharing and I will open it up for questions.
Wonderful. Amazing. So much information in such a little period of time. I put details to the course in the chat. Please click. It's going to be on Sundays starting 7 p.m. Eastern. Happy to announce it's going to be a $100 discount if you sign up in the next 2 or 3 days. So it's going to be a $200 course. And Dr. Vedam, amazing. You know, I was in your course, I think 2 cycles ago, and it's just amazing how it's growing and expanding and new people are coming in. And we have a few questions already. But we're only at 4:58. We can take questions if you have them put in the Q&A box. And Dr. Vedam, always know it. You were ready to answer everyone's questions until the last one is done. So Kumu Gupta ji, a stalwart supporter, glad to have you on board. Asking a few different questions. Right, humanity obviously existed before Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Dr. Vedam went into the long history of antiquity of different Homo species, Homo hominids, and how that has changed over time. And again, what we were taught versus what the evidence shows is different. So Kumuji, that's one. So obviously Hindu University of America, Dr. Vedam, you're teaching a course at HUA, but I think you're also teaching courses at other places. You've given hundreds of lectures, and so we are doing the work to correct these views in the world, and glad to be partnering with you on this. And do you want to touch on that? And Kumuji's last question was on culture, language, dressing, food. So other aspects of it that you kind of touched on, but I know you, in the readings that you gave in the course, there's all those things are detailed.
Right. So I see the questions over here. See the questions. What efforts are being made for understanding this? Do we know their culture, language, food, and dress, and so on? Yes. So there are clues. There are clues everywhere. So if you take the epigraphy, rather the temple sculptures and so on, we have an understanding of the ideas of Indian ideas of beauty, the Indian ideas of how warriors looked, and so on. Those things are depicted on the temple sculptures. We see that. In terms of food, yes, we have got some ideas. For example, in the very famous dialogue of King Milinda. Milinda was the Greek called Menenda, who converted to Buddhism approximately 200 BC, 150 BC, in that time frame. In one of his dialogues with Nagarjuna, he is the Bodhisattva, he is asking some questions. And one of the questions uses the metaphor of foods. And he says that if the cook in the royal palace, he makes a dish using different spices that we use today in northern Indian cooking or southern Indian cooking, things like cumin, pepper, various other things added to curds. He's basically calling out the ingredients of what you put in curry, which is in Indian spices, for example. So we have an idea that even by 150 BCE, Indians were completely aware of the value of using certain spices in cooking, and we can find the same recipes even today. So we have an idea of that one. The dress, like I said, we get that idea from the descriptions given in various books, as well as the temple epigraphy. In terms of language is one of those contentious things. People say a lot about language. There's a lot to talk. In this course, we discuss that. We can't very easily talk about this over here. But we know that India was something called a Sprackbund. A Sprackbund is a place, which is a linguistic area, which means many languages appear to have coexisted here for an exceedingly long period of time, and borrowing, sharing, influencing, and this kind of thing. And we find that happening in India. For a very, very, very long time, we see that happening in India. We also see evidence of out of India. If you see the books of the Rigveda, several other evidences we examine in the class, which suggests that this language that has evolved into Sanskrit moved out of India and influenced the so-called Indo-European languages. We see that thing that is static. It is dynamic. It keeps changing over time. The syllables change, the words change, grammar changes, and so on. In the evolution of languages, initially you have language, you have literature, then you have grammar, and this is the way things evolve. So we are seeing all the stages in various Indian languages with a lot of borrowings from each other. So it is not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer. Some of the common statements say we have got 2 language families in India, but I contest that. I contest that on the basis that India has been a linguistic area for a very, very long time. You may not be able to say there was Northern Indian family, Southern Indian family, Northern came from Aryans and all this rubbish. That is not tenable. So one more question is, Mayan culture is very similar to Bharata. Do we have recorded, verified evidence? I'm not studied this issue sufficiently in the Mayan civilization. I'm aware of several claims made to this effect, and one will have to study this in detail and look at the material evidence, the oral evidence, and see about the similarity. But yes, on the face of it, on some of the claims that I've read, and my own visit to Chichen Itza and other such places, I've seen there is some similarities over there, but it'll have to be studied. I'm not prepared to say anything more than that at this time. There's a question on, is it possible that gods Vishnu live in the galaxy or universe had interspace travel to India? No, I think this is an example of Eurocentric thinking. Eurocentric thinking puts the following preposition, that if anything advanced has to be made, it can only be made by white people who have got access to great technologies, mathematics, and so on. So if you see evidence of great engineering in the pyramids or in Brihadishwara temple or elsewhere, wherever else, the suggestion is aliens must have come and helped them to do it. So aliens had the technology, but these native people could not have had this technology. So the whole basis is racist and has to be thrown out. This is utter nonsense. So what we're seeing in my course is that not only did Indians develop much of the science, technology, math, architecture, and other such things, they exported this out at various time frames to including the Westerners. So we are seeing these kinds of things. So it's nonsense to assert some of these things.
I could jump in. Thank you for that, Dr. Vedam. We will be sending a recording of this webinar out to folks. If you miss it, if you want to share it. Seshaji also took both courses, a strong supporter. Thank you for being here. Let me launch this poll. Just let us know if you're interested in enrolling in the course. So it's going to start January 16th. Just yes, no, maybe I have questions. Let us know if you're interested in enrolling in this course. And that comes with the whole learning management system. And Dr. Vedam, somebody else asked about textbooks. Readings are included week by week, what you're going to be covering, the Zoom link, the recording, assignments. So we have a whole online learning management system that has gotten better, sharper, and Dr. Vedam is utilizing it very efficiently to give all sorts of readings that he's pulled from his decades of research and made it easy for us to access it as opposed to going out on the internet and trying to find it. Dr. Vedam has done that for you, and hence, you know, again, Hindu University of America creating a platform that's accessible for both experts and you know, gurus like Dr. Vedam to share with the rest of us so that we can be more informed on this and reclaim our history, write the articles that need to be written, do the research, because Dr. Vedam can't do it all. But on that front, Dr. Vedam, you were writing a book, and it was, what's going on there? I know you've been working on it. Do you have an update on that? And, you know, just it was amazing seeing you interact with Jay Deepa, right? Talking back and forth about these, you know, the high levels that we're putting into the text and getting out there and having these conversations. It's exciting for me. I hope I didn't speak too fast. I know we both have that kind of excitement that we get into.
Right. So I have the curse of the author saying that, the researcher rather, that when do you say enough, I'll start writing, because there's ever so much more to learn, to refine, to understand, to put over there. And one always feels, let me wait and get some more knowledge on this, some more knowledge in this. So this is the curse of the researcher. When do you stop and say, enough, at this point I'll write. So I'm glad to say that I have written a few more chapters at this by this December. That was my goal, to write a few more. So when will it be released? I will, like I said, the curse of the researcher. When I get over my own understanding that, yes, there is value over here to go to the public, I will work on that. So it's not ready as yet. So the next question is, what were the Sanskrit terms of sine, cos, etc.? What did they use for denoting angles, example, theta? So Indians use terms like jya and ko-jya. So these are the terms that we find in Surya Siddhanta and Aryabhatta's works. And these words were used in translations by the Muslims, through which, when it went to Latin, it became sine and cos. So there's an interesting story behind that. And in terms of denoting the angles, Aryabhatta had used measures in terms of 3.5 degrees. So they had graduated it into 60 degrees, 90 degrees. They were able to do these things, but his measure was 3.5 degrees. So I cannot remember the Sanskrit term for that angle itself, but they had done that. The next question, is there a dedicated effort by Indian government to catalog these findings and look for more evidence of our back history? So yes, there are things here and there sporadically. There are declarations that they will study Indian scientific knowledge and other things, but at the same time, we don't see so much of effort going towards revising the textbook narratives, which are still Eurocentric, or this leftist socialist narrative, or the Marxist narrative. We still see all of those things in the textbook. There is no effort being made to change those things. At least from my perspective, I can't see that happening. And in terms of documenting findings, there are various agencies. ASI is in charge of doing some of the results I gave you in carbon dating. These are all from ASI's works. ASI over several years have done much of this work. And so government agencies do much of these things, but there is need to connect these dots and bring this grand narrative over there. And that unfortunately has been left to private researchers like me, independent researchers. The government is not doing any of these things to my knowledge.
So Dr. Vedam, this is in January, you're going to be, it's a little bit renamed. It's the commissions, right?
Yes, it is.
So that's the first one.
Yes.
It's the first part of this. So I just put in the chat the second course and the 2-course sequence. I'm incorrect. It's the first of the 2-course sequence.
The 2 courses. And Sunil Tomala, glad to talk to you again. You have taken my earlier course. So this is a refinement. Every iteration that I make of these courses, I add some of the latest findings that we have So there'll be improvements and there'll be additions, but it is more or less the same course that you took when we did Reconstructing Hindu History. So it may not be necessary to repeat it again.
There's so much information, I feel like I should repeat it. No, but I think other people are saying that also. It's such an amazing course. It's so eye-opening from the historical facts perspective, and especially I'm born in Los Angeles, went to public school here. As soon as they started talking about Columbus looking for the Indians, I knew something was up. But now getting deep into it and seeing that this has been going on for hundreds of years and it's on purpose. Right? It's not by accident that our history has been destroyed, erased, and then we're taught to believe things that just don't make sense. And we knew it intuitively. And Dr. Vedam is at the forefront of making it make sense and sharing it. And, I understand the curse of the researcher. Keep on doing the research. We're here to work together to build this institution, to do this kind of stuff. So please do consider enrolling in the course. I've dropped that poll. I got 24 out of 35 people who filled it. I see Ramnarinji said he's going to enroll tonight. Great to hear that. A few more questions popped up in the Q&A box if you want to take that. And
yes,
then we can.
I will. So there's a question on, is it possible to have slides? No, I'm not sharing the slides as yet because until I finish my book, I'm not going to release the slides in public. But my talks are there, the two YouTube videos are there. You can pause it wherever the slides is shown, and please feel free to get the references out of that. There's another question on how were Marxists allowed to control narrative, and what is the change, if any, today? So we study this in great detail in this course on the historiography, like I alluded to. And how are the Marxists allowed? Well, in 1971, Indira Gandhi made a pact with the devil, literally. For political survival, she made a pact with the communist parties. She said in exchange for their support, she'd give them a ministership. And the only ministership the communists wanted very strategically was the HRD, human resources, because they could control the education sector. So she gave it to them. Narul Hassan was the minister at that time. And through his office, more than 30 agencies narrative. Any vice chancellor to these institutes or professor admitted had to be a Marxist, otherwise they wouldn't be admitted over here. And these people are the ones who took all the grants to write textbooks, to write books or conferences, represent the Indian point of view and so on. And that is how the Marxists came. And today, since 1970 to today, in 50 years, they have essentially kicked out the internal voice. There is no adhikara or voice for the person who comes with an Indian point of view. It is not there because the Marxists have purged the education system of that. So today, if you talk to any professor anywhere, you'll find them talking about Aryan invasion theory. You'll find them talking about two language. You'll find them rather the language families and things of this nature. So in my course, we will be studying this phenomenon in great detail. On what basis are some of these assertions done? What is the evidence to prove these assertions wrong? And what is the correct narrative? We go in detail, point by point, and we try to understand these things.
Wonderful. All right, Dr. Vedam, why don't we take it home? Please do enroll in this course. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Dr. Vedam, closing thoughts from you. We still have about 40 people joining us on this Sunday afternoon or wherever you're zooming in from. So again, thank you for participating, supporting HUA, enrolling in courses, making donations, just showing up to the webinars. However you're supporting us, we appreciate it. And Dr. Vedam, take us home. And again, always a pleasure to do these with you.
Yes, thank you, Ankur, and thank you for the audience for joining in. So like Ankur said, I do encourage you to take these courses because the fact that you joined today shows that you are indeed interested in the narratives on Indian history. You will not find a course of this nature in many other places. There are a lot of outstanding researchers out there who are doing amazing works, but the level at which they're presenting their results is quite difficult to follow unless you have been researching it for several years. The narratives and the counters they are making are difficult to follow. In this course, we have taken understanding of all the papers out there that are relevant, simplified that in a way that even a layperson can understand many of these issues. So this course will empower you. This course will empower you to look at Indian history, to see if you ever were to get a narrative that is bigoted, you'll be able to identify it and say, yes, it comes from the colonial perspective. Yes, it comes from Eurocentric, or it comes from a missionary idea, or it comes from socialist or Marxist. We'd be in a position to do that because we know the ideology they came from. We study that. We know the assertions they are making, how it is coming, and the evidence, if any, for any of their assertions and where the reality lies. So we'll be able to do all of those things. So I encourage you, please do consider taking it. Or if you know somebody in your circles who can benefit from this course, please do encourage them to take it. So thank you for that.
Dhanyawad. Namaste.
Namaste.